I have put my hands in this earth for 60 years. 60 years and the earth has not changed. The earth is exactly what it always was. It is everything around it that went wrong. My name is Ezra Caleb Morrow. I was born on the 14th of August 1849 in Hardin County, Ohio. On 40 acres, my father had cleared himself from second growth timber with an axe and a determination that I did not fully appreciate until I was old enough to understand what clearing timber with an axe actually costs a man. He started with nothing. He ended with 40 acres of the best corn ground in the county and a house with a proper floor and a barn that did not leak except in one corner of the south wall, which he always meant to fix and never did. I fixed it myself in 1878, 3 years after he died. I thought about him the whole afternoon I was up on that roof. The land I grew up on was black and deep, and extraordinarily generous to a man who treated it with respect. You put corn in that ground and it grew. You put wheat in and it grew. You kept your hogs on the mast in the timber in the fall and they finished themselves on what the woods provided. And you did very little except watch them get fat. The land did the work if you let it. That was the first thing my father taught me, and it is the most important thing I know. I was working beside him in the fields from the time I was 6 years old. I drove the team at 8. I plowed my first full furrow at 10, and my father walked the length of it and said it was straight enough and went back to the other team without further comment, which was the highest praise I ever received from him, and which I understood at the time to be exactly that. The years I want to tell you about are the years after the war, the years between 1865 and somewhere around 1880. Those were the years. Those were the years when a man with good land and good sense and the willingness to work from before sun up to after sundown could build something real. I was 16 when the war ended and I had been farming through it, keeping the home place going while my two older brothers were away. And when peace came and the country turned its attention back to itself, there was a hunger for what the land could produce that I had not seen before and have not seen since. Corn at good prices, wheat at good prices, pork moving at prices that made the autumn slaughter feel like something close to prosperity. I do not use that word lightly. I know what the lean years felt like, and I know what the full years felt like, and the full years of the late 1860s and the 1870s felt like the land was finally paying back what it owed for all the hard years before. I bought my own land in 1871, 80 acres adjoining my father's place, purchased from a family named Whitfield who were pulling up and going west. $1,060 for 80 acres of cleared broken ground with a small house and a serviceable well. I borrowed $400 from my father and paid it back over 3 years. And I want to tell you that paying that debt back was one of the finest feelings I have ever had. Not because debt is shameful. Debt is sometimes necessary, and there is no shame in necessary things, but because paying it back meant the land was mine in the full sense, mine and no one else's. That ownership meant something that I am not sure I can fully communicate to a person who has not farmed their own land. It was not pride exactly, or not only pride. It was more like responsibility made visible. You stood on your own ground and you knew that what happened to it was entirely your doing. There was no landlord to blame for poor drainage and no employer to fault for the wrong decisions. If the corn went in late, that was your fault. If the rotation was wrong, that was your fault. If the soil got thin from too many corn years without a rest, that was your fault. And if the corn stood tall and the hogs were fat and the wheat bin was full in October, that was yours too. All yours. That accountability was not a burden, it was a gift. It was the thing that made the work mean something beyond mere wages. My neighbors in those years were men like me, Harding County farmers, most of them born within 20 miles of where they worked, most of them the sons or grandsons of men who had come into Ohio when it was still being settled and had taken up land and held it. We knew each other the way people know each other when they have shared the same weather and the same prices and the same hard winters for 30 years. We did not always agree. There were men I liked less than others and men who liked me less than they showed. But when a barn burned, everyone came. When a man took sick at the wrong time of year and his crop was at risk, the neighbors came and got the crop in and then went home without making anything of it. I helped put up 4 barns in my life that were not my own. I helped getting crops for 3 different men who were laid up when they could not afford to be laid up. That is a way of living that does not need a name, but if it had one, the name would be something close to civilization. The tools of those years were simple enough that a man could understand and repair every one of them. The walking plow, the harrow, the corn planter, which by the 1870s had become a proper implement that dropped seed at measured intervals and covered it in the same motion. The reaper for wheat, which cut and laid the grain in bundles that you then tied by hand, walking behind the machine and binding as you went. A good man could bind behind a reaper all day without losing pace. I was a good man in that regard. I am not ashamed to say so. The horses were everything. I kept 3 horses through most of my working years. A matched pair of bays for the field work and a lighter horse for the road. Those bays were named Lincoln and Douglas, which I thought was amusing when I named them and which lost some of its humor after 20 years of listening to neighbors make the same joke about it. They were good horses. Lincoln was the steadier animal and Douglas was the faster, and between them they could do anything a farm required. I knew those horses the way I knew members of my family. I knew their moods and their tolerances and the particular way Lincoln's ears went when something in the field ahead was bothering him, which was usually a groundhog hole or a piece of rusted fence wire from some old boundary that the plow kept turning up. Lincoln died in the winter of 1891. I found him in the morning in the stall, already gone. He was 22 years old, which is a good long life for a working horse, and he had earned every year of it. I did not say much about it, but I felt it for a long time, longer than I told anyone. The seasons in those years had a clarity that I want to describe precisely. Spring was plowing and planting. The smell of broken earth and the sound of the meadow larks that came back every year to the fence rose and sang all through the plowing days as though they were hired to do it. Summer was cultivation and growth and the long careful watching for weather, for the hail that could take a crop in 20 minutes, for the drought that came on slowly and was worse for coming slowly because you kept thinking it would break. Autumn was harvest, which was the whole point of everything that came before it. And winter was repair and rest, and the quiet work of maintaining what you had against the year to come. Each season made sense because of the others. Spring meant something because of what autumn required. The rest of winter meant something because of what the body had spent in the summer. Nothing was wasted. Not time, not effort, not the manure that went back onto the fields, not the corn cobs that fed the stove, not the lard from the autumn killing that went into the crocks in the cellar and lasted through to the following fall. You used everything. Waste was not a moral failing in any abstract sense. It was a practical failing. Waste meant shortage later, and shortage was real. And real consequences focus a man's attention in ways that imaginary ones do not. I have watched farming change in my lifetime in ways I could not have imagined as a young man. The machines that came in the 1880s and 1890s were bigger, more complicated, requiring cash to purchase and cash to repair, and a relationship with the bank that the farming of my early years did not require. The consolidation of land, the smaller farms selling out to the larger ones, the men who could not make the new economics work, loading their families onto wagons and going west or going to the cities and not coming back. I watched men leave this county whose families had been here as long as mine. I watched land that had been farmed with knowledge and care pass into the hands of men who did not know its particular character, who did not know where it ran wet in a rainy spring, or where the soil thinned out along the south ridge and needed resting. That knowledge does not transfer with a deed. That is what people do not understand. The knowledge lives in the man who accumulated it. And when that man leaves the land or dies, it is gone. And the land suffers for the absence of it in ways that do not show up immediately, but show up eventually. I am 73 years old. I have been on the same ground for 57 years of my own account, and before that, as my father's boy. I know this land. I know where the water goes when it rains hard. I know which fields recover quickly from a late frost and which ones do not. I know that the old orchard ground on the northwest corner, where my father pulled the trees in 1861, still grows a better crop than anything around it because of what 40 years of apple leaves put into that soil. Nobody else alive knows that. When I'm gone, nobody will know it. That is the thing about the golden era that nobody tells you. It was not just an era of good prices or good weather or good neighbors, though it was all of those things. It was an era of accumulated knowledge, held in the bodies and memories of men and women who had been on the same ground long enough to understand it completely. That understanding was the real wealth, not the corn, not the land itself, but the knowing of it. That knowing is what is passing from the world, and once it is gone, it does not come back.